Hey, hello. It has been officially over a month since Bridgerton Season 3 wrapped up for us as viewers, and we even have our Season 4 lead announced as Benedict, but I am not quite done with Season 3 yet, which is okay because we have probably 2 years until Season 4, so we have to pace ourselves just a little bit, though I'm sure I will have some more thoughts about that upcoming for you. However, I did promise a Wallflower romance reading recommendation video in tandem with Season 3, and maybe this is more a passion project for myself as I really love and gravitate to Wallflower romance, which we will touch on before we leap into the books themselves as well. But as we know, Season 3 really leaned in to the Wallflower angle, at least in the aesthetics and the marketing, and of course Penelope's character. And Penelope Featherington has been a long-standing, much-loved Wallflower within the romance community. She was a fan favorite when the Bridgerton series was published, and she continues to be a fan favorite. And I would argue that Wallflowers really are coming into bloom, especially in romance in particular, and I think that there are a lot of reasons for that. But before we get into that completely, hi, my name is Melody. On this channel, we talk about books, book-adjacent things, and of course Bridgerton. And if any of that sounds good to you, go ahead and subscribe, like if you feel so inclined. But either way, happy to have you here as I tend to talk about wherever my interests lead me within my reading life, which is pretty eclectic. But I have always gravitated toward Wallflowers and Wallflower romances. And I think that there are a lot of reasons for this. For one, Wallflowers tend to be kind of bookish in their depiction, especially in modern historical romance. And there are a lot of gradients to this. We may need to get into a deeper discussion of Wallflowers in particular as an archetype. However, Wallflowers kind of exist in this space where they could also be blue stockings, but not always. There is a lot of gradient and room for kind of manipulation of the form. However, they always are in some way an underdog. And I think that narratively, we like to root for underdogs. And additionally, as a reader, I will admit, project myself on these Wallflower characters. I've always considered myself personally as a Wallflower, and I'm not begrudging other types of heroines or romantic leads because I like a broad swath, but I find myself going back to Wallflowers again and again. And I think there is something incredibly narratively satisfying in the Wallflower, in this idea that their person, their romantic interest, is seeing them for them, and this idea that as a reader, we are seeing someone, and I think that there is, at least for me, and maybe I am off base here, but there is something incredibly emotionally satisfying in seeing someone recognize someone that the rest of the world maybe doesn't see the true value of or the true worth of, and then that one person sees that spark. And I think that there's something to be said too. There was a bit of this in our discussion of Bridgerton in relation to Colin's character and the way the show kind of played with it and deviated slightly, or the way they chose to visually portray certain uncertainties or insecurities within that character within the visual medium. However, there is something to be said, especially I would say in modern kind of historical romance, that there is a tendency to pair a Wallflower with a rake. And I think that that too goes back to this idea of the kind of thrill of seeing someone who has been overlooked by so much of society seen so truly by their person. Part of the reason that the Cressida scenes in Romancing Mr. Bridgerton really strike so well for me as a reader, because we see Colin reinforcing his choice in Penelope and speaking to Penelope, understanding what that dynamic is between the two. We see this in the show as well. And a lot of these recommendations are going to kind of straddle the line between the book and the show, but they are all going to feature Wallflowers to some extent. And so let's go ahead and dive in to the main event of the books. If you have more thoughts about Wallflowers and the trope of Wallflowers, leave them below. Or if you would like a follow-up video of some kind where I extrapolate and actually think out those ideas, a little bit better, let me know as well. Now, this is going to be a robust list, but it is not an exhaustive list. I could have continued to read Wallflower Romances for the rest of the year and still not read all of them. And so this is just a sampling, books that I have read and loved that feature this dynamic. And also I will again touch on how I think it also correlates or ties back to the show, if it does in whatever way, or the book for those who may be interested in certain elements. But I do want to leave the door open that there are excellent books that I just haven't featured here because I've forgotten them or I haven't read them yet, or what have you. So go ahead and leave your Wallflower Romance recs below as well if you think that I have missed something that people need to read, because I'm sure I have. But to start on the titles that I personally have read, let's start with Temptations of a Wallflower by Eva Leigh, because while completely its own thing, it does feature a lot of things in common with our leads in Romancing Mr. Bridgerton, in our leads in this book, Sarah and Jeremy, because Sarah has a secret identity as an author, and Jeremy is a third son. In this book, he is a vicar, and he is kind of searching for his place in the world and is kind of at the behest of his father to a large extent, to the point where his father summons him home because he is kind of holding the purse strings for Jeremy. And his father is a pretty strict moralist, and so has summoned him home to unmask the identity of a mysterious author kind of making waves in the ton, the lady of dubious quality, because she is writing erotic tales. Now, in the process of kind of circulating in society again and trying to unmask this author, we're taking it for granted a little bit on why Jeremy in particular is the one to do this. His father thinks that his religious ties will make him more inclined to do this because it is an affront to morals and what have you, but we have to take it on faith a little bit that Jeremy is the one to uncover this author. Meanwhile, like I said, in the process of circulating in society, he meets Lady Sarah, who is a notorious wallflower, and Jeremy gets Sarah to open up in a way that she hasn't really felt a spark with anyone else in society, and kind of gets her off of the wall a little bit, and there is an intense attraction there. And Lady Sarah ends up marrying Jeremy, though she is also partly marrying him to hide her secret identity as the lady of dubious quality. When she realizes that there is someone trying to unmask her, she does not realize that this person is her husband until it is too late. And so then the both of them, once this kind of is revealed, have to grapple with what this means for themselves and their relationship. And Lady Sarah really has to kind of figure out what she is willing to sacrifice for love and what this writing means to her. So here we really have those elements of the secret identity as an author. Again, we have those elements of being the third son. Here there is an extra layer involved in terms of the kind of financial power that Jeremy's father wields over him, but like Polin, he's kind of uncertain of his place in the world, and in this book he really isn't fulfilled in his role as a vicar. Also, having a romantic lead that is a vicar, at least for me in historical romance, is kind of novel, so that's an interesting kind of angle as well. But he is also someone who secretly reads and enjoys the lady of dubious quality, so there is a little bit of conflict internally there for him as well in terms of his enjoyment of this work. And so we have a little bit of that internal upset with Jeremy that we also see in Colin, though in different ways. So I think that there are a lot of parallels here. Now, granted, not all of these books are going to have perfect parallels. We are going off of the germ of the idea of the Wallflower, and if you enjoy Wallflower Romances, I think these will be up your alley. But when there are parallels, I think they're fun to point out as well. Also, if I start to glisten at any point in this video, we're going to pretend it is an aesthetic choice, and not that I turned the air conditioner off for this video, because I've been unsure about what it is doing to the audio quality, even with me trying to isolate it out in videos, so we'll see what we get. But next, we have The Wicked Wallflower by Maya Rodell, in which a house fire turns a joke between admittedly drunk friends into a marriage or engagement announcement involving the ton's most eligible duke and London's least likely to misbehave. And the reason that Emma and her friends friends wrote this joke announcement to begin with while kind of messing around one evening, is that they are facing down a reunion of their finishing school in which there is this kind of time component where everyone who has graduated from this school has had a marriage, a successful match, and they are all single. They are all wallflowers. And so they're kind of facing down this fate. And Emma isn't interested in this Duke necessarily. She's not been pining after him along the wall. In fact, she has someone that she has been engaged with for seasons, but there's not an engagement because he and his family, who still hold a lot of sway over him, are in need of a dowry larger than Emma possesses. And so when our Duke Blake goes to meet this mysterious fiancé that he has just heard about through the papers, Emma is expecting him to denounce her in a room full of people who have come to call to kind of gawk at this surprise announcement, including her rival from school, very much a Cressida type character who has had her cap set on Blake. And instead of denouncing her in front of all of these people, he leads her out to the garden and basically proposes for real, or proposes a deal in that he needs a partner in crime for the upcoming inheritance games hosted by the aunt who raised him, who hosts this elaborate game every year in which the winner comes away as the inheritor of her fortune in her will for the next year, except her health has been in a notable decline. But even without that, Blake needs to kind of reform his very rakish image. He has just gotten out of a scandal. However, he needs financial backing for an invention he is working to create. I really think it's a calculator. But basically he's looking to kind of codify and create a system of calculation outside of ledger books that can have mistakes because his parents died in a tragic accident based on these faulty calculations when a roof collapsed. So initially when he proposes this to Emma, she says no because she still has her heart set on this other guy. And Blake is a little devious. There is some lack of consent in that he kisses her in the garden, really cementing that she has to play along with this for a little bit. But the deal is, if they win, she can break off this engagement. She will have her dowry to marry this other guy, and Blake will have an investment and a rehabilitated reputation in order to pursue his invention. But then they go off to these inheritance games, which is basically a more devious house party, and we do love a house party, especially for the proximity it allows between couples. And Blake and Emma start to realize that they have more in common than they think. But throughout this whole book, and this may be a stumbling block for some, I will admit, Emma really is still fighting off the feelings for this former love that she has, even if it is notably more of a puppy love. So we're seeing the kind of puppy love that Penelope had for Polin kind of emulated here, but this is the book potentially then for those who wanted to see Debling get his chance, because ultimately that is not her love interest, especially when she comes back to town and he is suddenly engaged after a very short notice to her rival, and him not really realizing that this woman is her rival and this woman has taken every opportunity to kind of set her down that she can. And that speaks to some of the indicators we have of who is a romantic interest, who can see the love interest the most clearly. One of the reasons that we know Polin is for Penelope in Romancing Mr. Bridgerton and Bridgerton Season 3, in that he can see through Cressida. To be fair, he's seen through Cressida since Season 1. And so that is one of those kind of smaller indicators within romance. And one of the reasons that we know Emma, spoiler alert, is not going to end up with this guy, her first love. But we have to watch her get there as well. And she is at heart a romantic. And watching her spin these tales of how she met Blake in these wildly romantic ways that really are just pulled from romance novels. We also see Penelope's love of books and particularly romances reflected there, though Penelope's love of romances, I feel like I remember being more of a show thing than a book thing, but still. And so we see that here, and we also see Blake meet her in that. So that is not his natural instinct, but he recognizes how she feels love and meets her at that place. And so there is that compromise there, but they both have to recognize what they want, especially after Emma gets a little bit more power in the situation to make her own choices, which I think is really great. So there is a lot going on here. I have not yet read the other books in this series, though I absolutely want to, but this does seem to be setting up a group of friends as the lead in this, and a group of wallflowers similar to what we see in Lisa Kleypas's Wallflower series, which, don't you worry, we will touch on in a bit, so just hold tight. But before we go there, let's go from the Wicked Wallflower from Maya Rodell to Wicked and the Wallflower by Sarah MacLean. Listen, I know these are very similar titles. I know they both have pink covers, but they are different books, though they both, of course, feature wallflowers. Now, it was a difficult decision to decide which Sarah MacLean wallflower to go with for this video. And maybe I need to reread the entire Sarah MacLean historical canon and just kind of touch on all of the wallflowers in her canon at some point, because I'm also very partial to the Fallen Angels series, because it is, or was, my first Sarah MacLean series, and I'm not partial to it just because of the puns. But One Good Earl Deserves a Lover is also an excellent wallflower book, but it's also on the kind of wallflower blue stocking continuum. But this book also involves a wager, and our hero, Devil, or Devin, or our romantic lead, I should say, because his heroism is up for debate, and Felicity Faircloth, which could be the choice or cement the choice right there, because Felicity Faircloth rolls right off the tongue similarly to Penelope Featherington. However, this also, like I said, involves a wager of sorts. Now, our leads meet at the very beginning of this book in a darkened room at a ball. Now, Felicity is at this ball with an invitation. Devil is not. He is there to seek revenge against the newest and hottest duke in town, because this duke had made a wager or a bargain with Devil and his brother Wit or Beast that he would not show his face in town again, and more importantly, that he would never have any heirs. And so when he is in town and it is circulating that he is on the hunt for a wife, well, that brings Devil to his door. And in the meantime, Felicity is trying to get some air and get away from the hubbub, because she is a wallflower, but she wasn't always a wallflower and has been cast out of her friend group. Now, Felicity has been on the kind of outskirts of previous books, particularly, and I haven't reread it for a while, but based on the references in particular in this book, The Day of the Duchess. Now, in this book, again, she is on the outskirts, and we see her after having this conversation with Devil, and their first introduction is admittedly a lot of banter. So we're getting a lot of our forward momentum and action in this book, particularly through banter, which I do think really aligns with the Bridgerton banter as well, because like I've said before, though I think it's been a while, the banter in the show is top notch, and the show is known for that, but I would argue that the banter in the book sometimes hits even more, and just the kind of flow and cadence of it. And so we have a similar kind of banter going on in this book. But back to that balcony, because while Felicity is on this balcony, kind of overhearing the cruel words of this former friend group, very mean girls, she makes the rash declaration, similar in some ways to Emma from the book before, that she is actually engaged to this new duke, which the others kind of find laughable. But Devil shows up to Felicity later in her bedroom and promises that he can make this happen, which is even more necessary, as after Felicity has gone home from this kind of ruined ball, as this news starts to circulate the ballroom, her brother is not very happy, which is how she finds out that they have lost their fortune, their money. And her brother was notorious for being good with money, for making good deals. He made a bad deal, they've lost their fortune, and they've been keeping this from Felicity for a season or two and resting all of their hopes on her. And so now everything is kind of riding on this relationship or this pairing with this duke that she has declared, which the family kind of hoped would happen naturally, even if it was a long shot. And now they just have to kind of wait and see. And the Duke does not deny this engagement. But this is also pushing Felicity closer to Devil, because he has promised not only to help her land the Duke, but be the flame to the Duke's moth. And yes, I was thinking of the Better Than Revenge rewrite to the whole book, especially because this whole book centers around revenge, and the revenge that Devil is hoping to take on this Duke. But in the meantime, Felicity starts to enter his world, which is notoriously and notably not the world of the ton and the ballroom set. So if you were looking for a read that gets you more out of the ballrooms, there are still the ballrooms here, but Devil is notoriously one of the leaders of the underground, the underworld within the Sarah MacLean universe. And so this really is kind of pushing us outside of the bounds of the ballroom, and Felicity is having to make a choice because she has always wanted back into the glittering world of the ballroom. She wants to get off the wall. She wants to be a part of society and to see and be seen. And so we have that kind of internal struggle there, and we have a Wallflower that is not your typical Wallflower in some ways, in that as much as I love the Wallflower trope, I also recognize its ability to kind of veer off into not like other girls territory quickly, and this is kind of grappling with that internally for Felicity. And so she ultimately has to decide what world she wants to be a part of, even as she is grasping her power and what she wants amidst two worlds that really are using her as a pawn in a lot of ways, with her family attempting to basically sell her off to save the family fortune and family name and reclaim the status for her father and her brother, and with Devil, who sets out, even amidst his being drawn to Felicity, that he sets out this kind of bargain, a devil's bargain. I know that she was very, very happy about how clever that was when she wrote this, to use her essentially, and he has to grapple with what he is willing to give up in terms of his revenge in some ways, and what is more important, which really kind of circles us back to a lot of Sarah MacLean themes. In some ways it does circle us back to the revenge plot at the start of the Rules for Scoundrels series, A Rogue by Any Other Name, though I would argue that Devil's backstory and the kind of impetus of their agreement, this agreement between these brothers, is a little bit stronger. And then we will watch the rest of the brothers over the course of the series, including Ewan, the Duke, that is the antagonist, essentially, at the beginning of this series, and the one that Devil is attempting to take revenge against. So come for Devil and Felicity and the beautiful Wallflower plot. Stay for the unhinged pining of Ewan and Grace, who is introduced in this book as well. But that is another subject, though we have in fact talked about Ewan and Grace's book before, many, many moons ago. Another book we've talked about before, though notably more recently, Isabelle and the Rogue by Liana de la Rosa, which is the second in the Luna Sisters series that started last year, where we are following Wallflower Isabelle, who is using her Wallflower status in order to gain entry into rooms that she probably should not be in order to gain intelligence regarding the French occupation in Mexico, which puts her on the radar of Sirius, who is a British intelligence officer. To be fair, she was already kind of on his radar based on Ana Maria and the Fox, the first book in the series, though they got off to a kind of rough start. They definitely butted heads, but this book puts them on the same page as they get more comfortable with each other. They start to like each other, especially Sirius liking Isabelle, and Sirius starts to use his intelligence connections to help Isabelle. But in connecting back to Bridgerton, we have this woman who is using her kind of unassuming status, or the way that society overlooks her, in order to gain actual information. Now, the kinds of information that they are gaining is vastly different, but in both cases, this information means power and protection for them. Now, national, international politics feels a little bit weightier than gossip, but there are more similarities than it would seem. However, I do really enjoy the intelligence aspects of this book. I like the way it's introducing new historical considerations into historical romance, and as someone who does like kind of spy elements in historical romance, it's fun to see that utilized in something that's not like Napoleonic in nature or strictly Napoleonic in nature, since the French are still involved. But I really enjoy that element as well. And in addition to some of the more obvious connections between Isabelle and Penelope in terms of the Wallflower angle and the use of that to gain intelligence, we also have some parallels between Sirius and Colin. And actually there are a lot of parallels between Colin and a lot of these romantic leads in these books, in that, especially for Sirius, he is kind of at a crossroads in a lot of ways. He has this established intelligence career, he has a history in the army, but he's not feeling fulfilled by that anymore. And so he's kind of having to assess what he wants from the future, though he does get some points in that he never feels threatened by Isabelle, but rather intrigued. So if you are looking for some romantic tension amidst some spying, this would definitely be right up your alley. Next, we have a book I reread on audio, which is also great incentive for me to remember to turn in my summer audiobook challenge form for Libro.fm, since I used one of my Libro.fm credits to purchase this audiobook, but that is the Wallflower Wager by Tessa Dare, which is very kind of quintessential Tessa Dare in a lot of ways in its quirkiness. Was this also the last Tessa Dare we've gotten? I have given up hope on ever getting the new Tessa Dare, I'm not gonna lie to you. So this may be one of the last Tessa Dares for you to savor. And it really does, like I said, kind of feel like a quintessential Tessa Dare in a lot of ways, though I have read far from Tessa Dare's entire canon. However, this follows another Penelope who is a wallflower. However, we are again not really in the ballrooms in this book, but we are at Penelope's house where she has a new neighbor in Gabriel, and we start the book with her chasing her pet parrot who has flown away to Gabriel's home. And she goes to attempt to gather him because she has history previously with the previous owner of this home. She has grown up next door, she knows the housekeeper, so she just wanders in search of this parrot, who notably we find out was raised or lived previously to their owner's passing in a brothel, which does make for some pretty funny kind of asides throughout the book, part again of that Dare banter and charm, which is a little bit different, I would argue, from the Sarah McLean banter and the Julia Quinn banter, but exists in the Venn diagram somewhere if the banter draws you in, for sure. So back to Penelope in this house at night in pursuit of this bird, where she stumbles across Gabriel, who is dressed for bed and not entertaining the ladies next door, and this is how they meet. And Gabriel is redoing this home. He is aiming to sell it for great profit. He is an industrialist, and part of the reason he has chosen this home in particular is because Penelope, a great society lady with a good reputation, lives next door. So when Penelope's aunt visits and basically tells her her brother is on the way home and is going to call her back, her being Penelope, back to the countryside. Basically, she is not going to live or get to live on her own as a spinster anymore. And so this kind of sends Penelope into shock, especially because she lives in this home with a basically menagerie of rescued animals. So if you like animals, you are going to love this book. It does, admittedly for me, sometimes veer a little too cutesy. However, there is a great livestock birthing scene, stay with me here, toward the end of the book that I think redeems it all. I love that scene. I had forgotten it was in this book, which makes sense because it's the book with all of the animals. So I would recommend this book purely for that scene. However, She basically sets out, again, another wager. We love a wager, especially in light of the first half of Bridgerton Season 3, with her aunt, makes a deal that basically if she circulates in society, is mentioned in the society papers, if Penelope writes about her, though there is no Lady Whistledown in this world, though sometimes we get crossover between romance authors, irregardless, not to that extent. I'm going on tangents, and I didn't even drink my full coffee this morning. She makes a deal with her aunt. She has to circulate in society, she has to be mentioned in the society papers, and she has to get rid of her animals, though I think she is allowed to keep her dog. So, Gabriel finds out about this. He is not happy because, again, Penelope is part of his property value. And so he agrees to help her, agrees to help these animals find homes. Through the course of this, because Penelope is not discerning when it comes to what homes these animals go to, they become closer. I will say this is a very cutesy premise and there is a lot of banter, which is absolutely true, but there is a kind of reveal toward the end of the book, without like spoiling anything, because it does come up pretty abruptly, that is related to Penelope's backstory and some trauma that she has experienced, probably kind of folding in to why she hasn't really circulated in society. Not probably, that's why, but involving a family friend from when she was younger and the kind of abuse that can happen between an older male family friend and a young girl. And I just want to give a warning for that because it does come rather abruptly, especially contrasted with the tone of the rest of the book. It's not out of place necessarily, but it could be jarring and hard for some readers, and so I do want to just make note of that. But we do still have our Wallflower and our wager, even if this is notably a little bit more outside the bounds than some of the others in relation to tying back or being related to Penelope and Colin's arcs. It's still a fun read. And again, I think if you like that Julia Quinn genre of banter, I think that Tessa Dare would also be up your alley, which is also a good point to mention because I don't think I mentioned it earlier, that I didn't pull any Julia Quinn books for this list. Julia Quinn does have a lot of Wallflowers, though Penelope is kind of her platonic ideal Wallflower within her canon of work, I would argue, but she does have a lot more Wallflowers. In many ways, Kate is also a genre or a version of a Wallflower, though notably different than Penelope. But I didn't pull any more Quinn for this video, though there are many we could pull from, including the Smythe-Smith quartet, which may be one of the reasons that I gravitate or think of that quartet so fondly, even outside of its references within Bridgerton, though I can look back at my ratings of those books and recognize they're probably not perfect books, but I hold a lot of fondness for them. Maybe it's time for a reread. But if we are thinking too about the kind of platonic ideals of a Wallflower, I would be remiss if I did not mention, as alluded to before, Lisa Kleypas's Wallflower series. Now, you may have been around when I actually read the Wallflower series for the first time just a couple of years ago, and embarrassingly in that video, misname the romantic interest and one of Kleypas's most famous romantic leads throughout that video, but The Devil in Winter by Lisa Kleypas. Now, there is a lot of argument about which is the best Wallflower book. I have opinions, but I also hold a lot of love for this book, and Evie is the kind of, like I said, platonic ideal of a Wallflower, even amidst a series that is centered completely around a group of friends who are all Wallflowers, because Evie is shy, she is soft-spoken, and then she meets Sebastian St. James, who as readers we had met in the previous book, her friend Lillian's book, when he attempts to basically kidnap her from her romantic lead. And Evie, at the beginning of this book, I remember reading this series because I read them straight through, and I was like, how are we going to redeem this man? I am a reader of Sarah MacLean, so I recognize it can be done, but like in the expectation or kind of wish fulfillment wantings of wanting to see Colin grovel in season 3, we had a complete reversal of expectations in this book, in that we don't have a groveling Sebastian necessarily. We have an Evie that shows up at his doorstep at the start of the book with a proposition and basically offers herself and her dowry in exchange for essentially his protection from her abusive family, as well as the opportunity to be with her father in his dying days, because her father is not among the gentry. In fact, her father is the owner and runner of a well-known and loved gambling den, gaming hell. Here we go. And so Sebastian, a notorious rake and philanderer, takes this deal. What he does not anticipate is essentially inheriting a gaming hell, let alone realizing he is really good at running a gaming hell. And he definitely does not anticipate falling in love, or at least lust, with his wife. And when these feelings emerge and come to the forefront and he pursues a relationship with Evie, she presents him with another bargain, in that she will not be intimate with him unless he can be celibate for 3 months, including with her, and thus sets off a whirlwind of flirtation, complicated not only by the running and day-to-day of this gaming establishment, but by Evie's family, who are trying to get her back, regain control of her and her money, essentially, and that outside, especially Clepus, outside antagonism there. Though I will caution that there is some fat phobia mixed in with that was not my favorite and was a little frustrating because the rest of this book is so delicious. But like with Bridgerton, this is one of those books where we do have to consider what time it was written in the same way that we evolved in the perception of Penelope's body in Bridgerton, though this did come after. In terms of publication, this was later than Romancing Mr. Bridgerton, but still the late 90s to mid 2000s were what they were. Having grown up in them, I am familiar, though it's still not my favorite, especially because here we do seem to be using the shorthand or using fatness to equate or to be a visual shorthand for a moral failing of some kind, and to seed more disgust from the reader toward the villain in the piece. So I do have complicated feelings about that, I will admit, and that is part of the reason that I really do lean a little bit more toward Lillian's book in terms of my ranking of the Wallflower series. However, I do still really love Evie and Sebastian and the dynamics of this book, of this relationship. We get a lot of really great moments, including them going to Gretna Green for a quick elopement, the setting of the gaming hell, and just the dynamics between these two, and the way that we see Evie bloom both in this environment and in being able to bounce off of Sebastian as a romantic interest, and how her confidence isn't solely linked to him having interest in her, but that we see that fire there as well. It still really is a delicious book. And while we can have complicated feelings and see red flags in the positioning of a man in the public image as a wife guy in modern media, Sebastian St. James is a quintessential wife guy. Spoiler alert, he will continue to love this woman through all of the cameos that they get continuing through the Ravenel series, which is Clepus's next series and the first series I read from her. So there is a lot to look forward to and a lot of longevity with this couple. And while the kind of mechanics of the Wallflower angle are vastly different, I would argue, between Evie and Penelope's books, they are again both, to some extent, I would argue, and this may be controversial, you can argue it, they are close to kind of platonic ideals. That is hyperbole, to be clear, of the Wallflower trope. They really embody that archetype so well, and so if you are on the lookout for another fan favorite Wallflower, this may be right up your alley. But maybe you're tired of British Wallflowers. Joanna Shoup and Alice and Kit have you with The Lady Gets Lucky, which I believe this is still her newest series. This is not her newest book. This is the second in the series, but I think it's at least her most recent finished series. And this has a lot going for it in terms of connections or things similar that you may enjoy from Bridgerton Season 3 and Romancing Mr. Bridgerton, because we have in Alice and Kit, again, a wallflower and a rakish character. Kit is a little bit more of a rake than Colin, but he is also trying to find his footing in a lot of ways like Colin, and he has a lot of insecurities like Colin does. In some ways, he is also reminiscent of the romantic lead in the Eva Lee book I did not pick to feature, but also fits this prompt, how the wallflower was won, in terms of that kind of insecurity and working through that with their wallflower partner who can see them as clearly as they are seen. And I think that that is a notable other piece of the appeal of the wallflower, especially if we are pushing into the wallflower rake dichotomy that I haven't mentioned. I mentioned the point of the wallflower being seen so clearly, but the fact that the wallflower can often see their romantic interest or romantic lead in a way that the rest of society can't, which we see so particularly with Colin and Penelope. And there is a similar beautiful moment in this book where, without having actually given you the setup of this book yet, Alice and Kit are talking about flirting because there is another wager or deal of sorts on the table. And Alice has basically asked Kit to show her how a man flirts with a woman, how Kit in particular flirts with women, so that she can recognize it if someone is flirting with her, which I personally find highly relatable. However, Kit starts putting on the charm, pulling out his best moves, all of the most successful moves, especially when they are used in tandem. And Alice is basically standing there just blinking at him. And she was like, "Oh, is that it? Are you done?" And he's like, excuse me? That always works. And he is a little butthurt about it. He starts to get really insecure about it. And she's like, "But that's not you. That isn't the you that I know and really like. That is some facade," and is able to see through it so clearly, reminiscent to that conversation between Penelope and Colin on the eve of their wedding in the show. So there are a lot of parallels there, like I said. But what is the book actually about? It starts at a house party that the first book of the series also starts at, the last book of the series also starts at. I am just gonna go out on a limb and a vague memory, and I do think the third book probably also starts at this house party. It is the central house party of this series. So it is the Gilded Age. They are, of course, having a house party in Newport, and Alice shows up at Kit's doorstep, similar to how Evie shows up at Sebastian's doorstep, and presents a bargain. Or essentially, she wants Kit to show her how to attract a suitor. So we're seeing that theme. Colin offers Penelope his help in Bridgerton without Penelope asking, but we see a lot of this as a kind of central setup in these books, which is why I mentioned that being a trope that was being introduced to the show, that was a familiar trope within the genre back when it was announced. And you, as someone who was here with me, probably already know that. I'm not speaking down to you. So she shows up, asks for this assistance, and Kit is really drawn to her from the get. He 100% would give this assistance, except he had promised Maddie, his friend, who is hosting this house party, that he would not seduce any of the eligible young women that were at this house party. Chaperones, widows are still on the table. Alice is not. And so he has to turn her down. But then Kit, who is attempting to get a supper club up and running, finds out that Alice is friends or friendly with the chef, who is the chef at the hotel that her and her mother live at, and knows the recipes that Kit wants. Kit has been trying to lure this chef away from this hotel. Alice is like, that's never gonna happen. This is a dream placement for him. It's a lot of status. But if you help me, I bet I could get you some recipes. This develops further over the course of the book, and Shoop is really notable for having women that have kind of interests outside the box, but also employment or kind of vocations in a way that we might not see in other historical romance. And so if you like this book, if you like that idea, definitely check out more Shoop. She is one of my favorite historical romance authors. But Alice is essentially a chef. And so even as Alice and Kit are getting closer, as she is getting these lessons, and there is an undeniable attraction between these two, and she is becoming more enmeshed in the kitchen of his supper club, still there is this understanding that she is trying to attract an actual partner, an actual marriage, and that there is something standing in the way of Kit being that, especially as he is again a more rakish character. This puts her kind of in contact with the Duke, who will circulate through all of these books as well, which is really satisfying, as he is the romantic lead of the last book in a really satisfying way, because he has been kind of making cameos or passed over by a lot of the women within this friend group that is central to this book and these connectors. So we see him kind of being disappointed a lot. He is the doubling of this book for sure, because Kit has to decide what he wants and if he is going to fight for Alice or if he's going to give her up for this match that seems so perfect on paper and is kind of part of the reason of why she sought him out in the first place. And initially he thinks, yes, this is what he is going to do, but like with Polin, jealousy gets in the way. So we've got those elements of almost losing a love to another and fighting for them, a woman with passions outside of just society. We've got a hero or romantic lead that is fighting insecurities, internal insecurities with banter and kind of rakish behavior, which we see a little bit more in the show, or charm, I should say. That idea that we see Polin, who is behaving so much differently at the beginning of season 4, and Penelope picking up on that, similar to how Kit is behaving in the beginning of this book. I see a lot of that reflected between those two characters in that way. And so I think that if you are interested in that and seeing a couple, again, who can kind of pull each other's walls down and see each other so clearly, this would be a book for you. But maybe you're like, yes, Melody, all of these are excellent choices. We love a Wallflower, but I miss the Bridgerton of it all. I miss that family. May I introduce you to The Wilds by Eloisa James and The Wallflower of the Wilds with Say Yes to the Duke, which is a kind of flip of the other book in this series, which is Say No to the Duke. But here we are following Viola, because Eloisa James is also a Shakespearean scholar, and I think this is one of the only books, I'm sure there are Shakespearean references, that's a real hallmark of an Eloisa James, but in this book we're going even further back in theater history with a Bible play, which I remember being really tickled by when I read this. And this is following, like I said, Viola, who is a member of the Wilde family, but she is a stepdaughter, and she has always felt a little out of place because the Wildes are big characters. They're loud, they're boisterous, they're renowned and well-known, and Viola doesn't really like all of that attention. And so she becomes enamored with the local vicar, who is also already engaged, which is a roadblock, because for her, this quieter, attractive man represents the possibility of a peaceful life that doesn't really jar her much. It's safe, it's protected, and she doesn't have to go outside of her comfort zone. And listen, as someone with anxiety, I recognize and respect the need for a comfort zone. However, Viola is shifted from that when she is accidentally compromised by the Duke Devon. And Devon, despite what he thought, doesn't just want Viola's hand, he wants her heart as well. And so we see, similar to, again, that puppy love we see from Penelope with Polin, though again with this instance, like with the Wicked Wallflower, we see that puppy love upset for a new romantic interest. We still do have that element and that idea of growing up, but we have again that boisterous family at the center here. We do still have a lot of that banter and kind of some of those comedic moments, especially kind of setting up Viola as a shy wallflower of sorts. We have moments that could be reminiscent of some of the scenes, especially in the first half of Romancing Mr. Bridgerton, but also there is a scene in this book that takes place in a closet that could be for fans of a certain carriage scene. Now listen, I actually don't often remember specific intimate moments in romances because I am usually focused on that catharsis of the kind of romantic tension and whatever journey internal journey these characters are on. I don't know. I don't have to explain it to you. But I read this book in 2020, which admittedly was not that long ago and also forever ago, lifetimes ago. And I still remember the closet scene from this book in a way that my brain just has not grasped on to other intimate scenes in other books in the same way. And so I think in that way, I draw the parallels between that and the carriage scene. And it just really worked for me. There were hits and misses in this series for me, I'm not gonna lie, but I remember really, really enjoying this book. There is a kind of like comically overdrawn villain of sorts in that if you like the Cressida character and that antagonism as well, there is some of that in here for you in a different kind of dynamic. So that could be fun because I do think, like I said, there is still catharsis in that overdrawn outside antagonist sometimes. But yeah, if you were looking for a family to adopt after the Bridgertons, the Wilds are definitely on the table, as well as Lisa Kleypas's Ravenels, which I may be mispronouncing, that I mentioned earlier, which is a kind of like spin-off in some ways, in some books, of the Wallflower series, or you do see reoccurring characters, crossover characters in that series, similar to how you see in Sarah MacLean and how we see across Julia Quinn's work sometimes. Now, I've been very vocal about being a historical romance reader and wanting to prop up historical romance, especially in relation to Bridgerton, but that does not mean I do not read contemporary romance, and you may be craving a contemporary romance or something in contemporary romance that will hit a lot of those same buttons for you that Bridgerton Season 3 does. And in that case, let us read All the Feels by Olivia Dade. This follows Alex, who stars as Cupid in a Game of Thrones-esque adaptation of the Aeneid. And leading up to the new season, he is given a handler because he was in a bar fight that caused a lot of bad press. Lauren is a burnt out ER therapist who also happens to be related to one of the misogynistic showrunners of this adaptation of the Aeneid, and she is made Alex's handler by this relative because he essentially views her too frumpy and fat, to be completely honest, to be on Alex's radar. He is wrong. And Alex and Lauren become very close. Alex becomes very dependent on Lauren. However, Alex is dealing with a lot internally at the same time and ends up getting in another scandal under Lauren's care that costs her her job and tears them apart, and he is left bereft and attempting to win her back and to make amends for that as well. So there is a lot going on here. I absolutely adore this book. I need to reread it. In Lauren, we have a kind of modern Wallflower. We have the body diversity representation and Alex's worshiping of her. We have a secret writer identity, but it is not Lauren. It is actually Alex, who secretly writes very dirty fanfiction about his character on this show, Cupid. So that is notable and could be related to any scandals featured in this book, as he uses fanfiction as an outlet, and it's just a lot of fun. I really love it. While Colin is not a duke, and we could have whole conversations about the way that historical romance has really kind of veered into Duke territory. I have heard Sarah MacLean talk on this and how it's really encouraged by publishers because readers respond better to Dukes, and part of that is that it's kind of like the highest you can get in society, and so a contemporary equivalent would be like a billionaire romance or a celebrity romance, and so we do have some of those dynamics at play in the kind of contemporary sphere here, and I just really love this book and I think you should read it. Again, we do have a lot of that charm and banter that is quintessential to Julia Quinn and to Bridgerton in a modern setting, so that is, or I think would appeal to you as a reader as well. Speaking of modern settings and charm and banter, if for some reason you have not yet read Get a Life, Khloe Brown by Talia Hibbert, I think that that would also very much fit the bill of a kind of contemporary equivalent to the Wallflower romance. And if you can get a hold of the audiobook, which is how I first read the book, it is read by Lady Danbury herself, so another Bridgerton connection. But it follows Khloe Brown, who has a chronic illness, and that has kind of forced her to be a little bit of a homebody, but she wants to get a life, and so she creates a list of things she wants to do, and this puts her in the path of the building's handyman, Red, and the banter and the relationship that develops. But Hibbert's books, especially the Brown Sisters trilogy, which somehow are each better than the last. Like, Khloe Brown was so good, and you need to read it if you for some reason have not. But going into the next book, I was like, there's no way we can top Khloe Brown, and we just kept getting better. So if nothing else, this is your introduction to the Brown sisters. Khloe is just the most Wallflower adjacent, though is not a perfect fit, but it's a similar spirit, especially because Red starts to help her accomplish the things on her list. And so it's not necessarily a bargain to get a suitor, but it is something that is throwing them together, as well as the proximity of the building, and the banter and the humor in this book is just top tier. So definitely something to have on your radar as well. But with that, I have talked about a decent number of books, so that is a good starting point, I would hope. So I'm probably going to wrap it up here, but let me know what you're thinking. Have you read any of these books? Do you think they capture the spirit of the Wallflower trope? What other books do you think capture the spirit of the Wallflower trope? What is it about the Wallflower trope, if you like it, that appeals to you? Or I guess if you don't like it and have stuck with me this long, one, thank you, but what do you find harder in a Wallflower trope for you? But personally, I recognize that I am really drawn to a Wallflower trope, and this is just a celebration of books within that trope that I have really enjoyed, as well as giving you some options to kind of ease you in the withdrawals of being done with Bridgerton Season 3. But that doesn't mean that we'll never circle back to Season 3. If there's still anything that you would be interested in hearing me talk about specifically in Season 3, let me know. I make no promises, but I promise to contemplate. But as always, I really appreciate you being here, being interested in my thoughts, in my recommendations at all. Go ahead and like and subscribe if you feel like it. Read something good. Again, we have some more options here after today. And yeah, bye.